Well, I'm Maiysha Kai. I am the lifestyle editor of TheGrio. I'm also the host of one of its newest podcasts, Writing Black, where we feature Black writers across genres and mediums. And it's been really exciting. We launched, I believe, on August 14th. So we are pretty new in the space.
So tell me about Writing Black.
So, this is I've done a literary podcast before, and I'm pretty sure you can see that I love books. I've always loved them since I was a little kid. But as a writer myself, I've worked in so many genres. My parents joked that I was writing stories as a little kid, and growing older, I got into theater. I've written plays. Then I became a singer-songwriter and did that professionally for a decade before turning to journalism. And so, having worked in all those mediums, I have respect for how they independently work and how they dovetail together. But the bigger thing here is that we're always telling stories. No matter what genre you work in, you're always telling a story. And specifically when you're talking about people of color, in this case, Black people, we bring ourselves to the page. We bring ourselves to the written word. And so this podcast is more than a literary podcast in the sense of traditionally just books. This is really working with wordsmiths, who work in all mediums, but who bring their identity to their craft.
So who's your big inspiration? Who inspired you to do it, to write a podcast? And then about Writing Black.
Okay, well, to be perfectly honest, I don't know. I think I was kind of like hired to do I don't know that I was so inspired to do a podcast as it was kind of one of my job requirements, but I love to talk to people. So it's a pleasure. It's conversation. I'm also a second gen journalist. My mother is a writer and producer. Well, was a writer and producer for many years. She's retired from that now, but and grew up in a newsroom. So I'd have to say my mother is probably my biggest inspiration. Although I say all my parents, because my father and I are close. I have a stepmother who I'm also close to. And growing up, I was just exposed to a lot. I was exposed to a lot of arts and culture, a lot of theater, a lot of, my stepmother would take me to the library every week and make me pick out, she was a teacher, and would make me pick out a certain number of books. I think I had a wall of books like this in my childhood bedroom. So I always, words were always really important. And communicating, language was always very important in my family. So I'd have to say they're my biggest inspiration more than anything.
Okay, you talked about music and singing. So yeah. You're wearing so many hats. So how do you lounge from music to podcast?
It has not been a linear path. It's not one that I could say was predictable. I really actually originally had set out. I went to college with writing as, I wouldn't say it was my minor, but it wasn't my main focus. My main focus was actually musical theater. I went to a college where you didn't have to declare a major. I went to Sarah Lawrence, and so I had the opportunity to really explore a lot of things at once. And for me, the three main things that I was studying were musical theater, writing, and African American studies. Like that was, and the great thing about that particular school for me was that they encouraged you to do interdisciplinary work. So, I could do a theater piece about something I was learning in African American psychology, or I could, do a documentary even on something that I was writing, a piece of fiction that I was writing. So that was a really, I think, unique and special opportunity for me to be able to work in a lot of mediums myself. But yeah, I was a musical theater kid, and I think I got halfway through Sarah Lawrence and realized that really it was the musical part that I loved the most. I really liked cabaret singing. I loved jazz. I loved writing songs. I was starting to get ideas for my own songs. So I got out, and I actually was initially teaching drama at a private school in Manhattan. Yeah, no, so I told you it's not linear. And while I was doing that, so here's another career I left out. While I was doing that, I was a school administrator. I was very young, but I was running this program. And one of the people I hired asked me if I'd ever thought about modeling. And, having never been a, I guess what you would call a skinny person, I was like, no, and, she suggested that I look into, plus modeling, and I did. And it took off for me after a while. And so I did that for 20 years. That was actually my main source of income for 20 years.
Wow.
Plus modeling. I got to work with some amazing people and go all over the world. And it actually ended up funding my music career. So, while I was doing all that, I also, joined a little local band. And while I was doing that, kind of got introduced to a producer who really wanted to work with me independently. And we did that. And I put out my first album in 2008. I was nominated for a 2009 Grammy for my first single, and put out another.
So what's the first single? Give me the name.
It was called Wanna Be. It was called Wanna Be.
Wanna
yeah,
Be.
2 words.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
2 words. And put out another live album in 2010. The music industry is rough, and I gotta be honest, I loved performing and I loved songwriting. I did not love being in the industry. And it actually, when I hit 40, I started blogging, because I was like,
no, let me just ask you. I'm gonna put you on pause. You say you didn't like being in the industry. Now
I didn't.
Because I hear that a lot, and so I wonder, what is your experience with it?
I think a couple of things. I think, and this is just my experience. I think there's some amazing. It's like any other industry. There's amazing people in it, and then there's some not so amazing people in it. But I also think, and I think we've seen this recently, even with things that have been in the news, the industry is not structured to support artists, right?
Right.
So you really have to be about your business. You can't just, and that's fine. That's great. In my case, I'm not sure I always had the right management or the right, I don't feel like I had the kind of support I needed to have the kind of career I wanted. I also feel like, I think I was already at least 30 by the time I put out my first album. And I gotta be honest, I think it's an industry largely for younger, more malleable people. I think at that age, I was very set in who I was. I very much knew, my brand, my identity, what I, and that it didn't necessarily adhere to what, major music execs wanted me to do. But I'm really proud of the work I did. I went further in that career than I ever thought I would. I really just wanted to sing and perform. And when I first got the offer to do an album, my first thought was, oh, this will be really cool. I can hand this out at my concerts, because I was playing around, New York City. And it never occurred to me. I didn't even know I'd been submitted for a Grammy until the day that the nominations were announced, that night. A journalist friend called me up and was like, oh my God, you got nominated for a Grammy. And I was like,
wow.
So
how amazing was that?
Listen, as they say, God is good. So, I got that validation that I needed. And I think once and that's not to say that the Grammy is, Grammy nominations are an indication of everybody's talent. There's a lot of ridiculously talented people out there. But I think, for me, it was just not what I was destined to do, really. But I started blogging casually, and I had a friend who, and people would commission me over the years. I don't know how people got hip to the fact that I could write, but I was doing ghostwriting for an advertising agency. I was, so when I say I've worked in a lot of mediums, right? I was doing some ghostwriting for ad campaigns. I was doing some ghostwriting for other people, personalities who would submit op-eds and things like that. And I had a blog going, and a friend of mine at The Root called me up and was like, you should be writing for The Root. So I became a contributing writer there. I did that for a couple of years while also taking other assignments elsewhere and kind of, sharpening my skills in that department. Thankfully, I had my mother with me as a mentor. That's a beautiful thing about having a mother who, worked for 25 or 30 years in the industry. But, even just little things about just how the industry works, how it's structured, all those kind of things. And then I guess after about a couple of years, I was hired to be the managing editor of a new vertical that was focused on Black women. You know, it was really, I should say it was a femme-centric vertical, because I really didn't just relegate it to like naturally born women. It was kind of like LGBTQ, like the whole arena of topics, basically. And that expanded to lifestyle. And by the time I left the route 4 years later, I was managing both lifestyle topics and entertainment. And I had a podcast going, a literary podcast. So it was a real actual joy and relief to be recognized for that by TheGrio and have them bring me on to build their lifestyle section. That was really cool. It felt, again, really validating.
Your favorite guest, your worst guest?
Oh man, ooh, put me on the spot. Okay, well, I don't know that I would never name a worst guest, and I don't know that really has been one.
Oh, really? I would.
You know, I mean, unless they sit there and they're just totally silent. I mean, you know. But let's see, favorite guest. Gosh, there's been so many. Like, that's the thing. Like, there's been some people I've had some really
great conversations.
Oh my gosh. Like, you know, we opened the podcast with Jay Ivey, right? And Jay Ivey is somebody who I've, you know, who's been in my ether. I mean, I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I live there now. We're in the same, you know, generation, kind of ran in the same circles. And we actually met in New York originally, both being on 15. And it was so cool to have him kind of opening things up for us, because he's another person who's got this very multi-layered kind of writing career, you know, having written for film, you know, hip hop. I mean, you know, being on, you know, Never Let Me Down, on College Dropout, being a poet for so many years and championing spoken word. Like, that was really dope to me. I really feel like it totally epitomized what we were trying to do with this podcast. Like, that was really exciting to me. I love interviewing. I've interviewed George M. Johnson a few times.
Robert Jones, was it?
Robert Jones was another person.
How was it with Robert?
Robert is fantastic. Robert's fantastic. And actually, Robert is coming up on our roster. I want to say Robert is coming up this weekend. Yeah, Robert is one of my favorite people to interview. He's just so insightful, so sensitive. And, you know,
so is there anybody that you want to interview that you haven't interviewed?
Oh my gosh, so many people. Like, I would love to interview Alice Walker, right? I would love to talk to, Isabel Wilkerson is somebody I would love to talk to. But yeah, there's been some amazing folks that, you know, I've had the pleasure of interviewing, some really incredible minds, incredible thinkers. Claudia Rankin was one of my favorite interviews. I think she's brilliant. Brittany Cooper is a friend, as is Tarana Burke. So those are like always fun when, like, you know, I'm blessed to, I guess, as a journalist, and even, I guess, you know, just, you know, you talk to people, you communicate. I'm blessed to be surrounded by a lot of writers. Peter Lehman, I would love to have on the podcast. I would love to have him. I think he's amazing. Yeah, there's a lot of people. Alice Randall was a favorite interview of mine. I think she's incredible. So yeah, the list could go on and on. I mean, I really just, I love that.
So your podcast, it launched in August the 14th. So if
August 14th,
I needed to find you and wanted to look at,
well, they can find us on, they can find us on the TheGrio Black Podcast Network or anywhere else that they find their podcasts. But come on over to the TheGrio Black Podcast Network, because I'm not the only one there, and there's some really amazing content coming out there, and I really think people should check out what's going on. There's been a lot of growth, so I'm really excited to be part of it.
Okay, so what's next for you? Because you wear so many hats. You got so many.
You know, what is next for me is continuing to develop this podcast and hopefully develop an audience for it, but also developing TheGrio's lifestyle section and really expanding what it means when we say that Black lives matter, because Black lives are more than trauma and news stories and survival stories. And, you know, we have such a rich and dynamic culture. It's so diverse within ourselves. Like, I'm really looking forward to expanding on that for our audience.
Okay, so close me out with something inspiration. Maybe we can hear the new song or something that you got in mind that may be coming out soon.
Well, honestly, right now, all of my attention is on this podcast. But I would say, you know, it is important for us at this juncture to preserve our stories. Mm-hmm. Preserve our stories at all costs, to tell our stories, to not let anybody silence our stories or revise our stories or edit our stories. Our stories are our own. Exactly. And we need to hold on to that, and we need to put them out into the universe. So that's my inspirational note, I think.
Well, they heard it all right here on Brandon. Just told it. We just got the message.